The legends of the Holy Grail have long captivated the imagination of humanity, whispered across centuries in the flickering light of medieval castles and the quiet reverence of sacred monasteries. It is a story that seems simple at first glance, a golden cup, a vessel of Christ, lost to history and sought by the brave and the ambitious alike. Yet, beneath the polished surface of this familiar tale, there lies a far deeper, far more forbidden secret. The Grail, as the oldest whispers suggest, is not merely a cup. It is a legacy, a bloodline, a living inheritance that has moved silently through the corridors of time, shaping empires and guiding destinies from the shadows. This is the story that history textbooks dare not tell, and it is the story that begins to intersect with one of the most enigmatic figures of early American history, Pocahontas. To understand the full scope of this hidden legacy, we must first step back into Europe, into the forests and chapels of the Middle Ages, when tales of knights and quests were more than mere entertainment. These stories carried coded truths, often veiled beneath layers of allegory. The Grail, it was said, was not simply a chalice to be found or possessed. It was the symbol of a sacred lineage, a bloodline blessed with divine favor, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Kings and queens, noble families, and secret societies have all been linked to this lineage, each custodian carefully concealing its existence, as though the knowledge itself held power too great for the uninitiated. The earliest accounts speak of Joseph of Arimathea, the man who, according to legend, received the cup used at the Last Supper. He is said to have brought it to Britain, carrying with him a mystery wrapped in divine purpose. Over centuries, the Grail transformed from an object of devotion into an inheritance of blood. To possess the Grail was not merely to hold a relic. It was to carry a destiny, a silent, sacred influence over the world. Monks recorded obscure manuscripts, hidden deep in abbeys and cloisters, often deliberately encrypted or coded, ensuring that only those who were meant to understand could ever glimpse the truth. In the shadows of Europe, secret societies rose, their rituals and knowledge closely guarded. The Knights Templar, among the most famous of these orders, were believed to have safeguarded ancient relics and esoteric wisdom. Some historians suggest that their true mission was not treasure alone, but the preservation of a sacred bloodline connected to the Grail itself. It was a lineage that reached beyond borders, beyond the visible structures of power, a living legacy that could not be destroyed by war, by conquest, or by the passage of time. Yet, despite centuries of speculation, these ideas remained largely confined to whispered theories, passed quietly among scholars, mystics, and those who looked beyond the surface of recorded history. As we turn our gaze across the Atlantic, the story becomes even more compelling. What if the Grail's influence did not remain in Europe, bound to castles and monasteries? What if, in the hidden folds of history, it crossed oceans, carried not by armies or kings, but by lineage itself? It is here, in the early colonies of North America, that the legend begins to intersect with a young woman whose life has been recounted countless times in stories, but whose true legacy may have been obscured by time and agenda. Pocahontas, daughter of Chief Powhatan, has often been remembered for her role as a mediator, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of cooperation and survival. Yet, beneath the well-worn narratives lies the possibility of a far more extraordinary inheritance. This inheritance, subtle and unspoken, is what some theorists now call the Grail Blood. Unlike the silver and gold that explorers sought across continents, this was a treasure of a different kind, a living, breathing legacy that could shape nations in ways both visible and unseen. And while Pocahontas' story has been romanticized, simplified, and in many cases distorted, there are hints that her lineage carried something far older, something secret, something powerful enough that its true nature was deliberately kept from the pages of history. To fully appreciate this, we must consider the world she inhabited. The early 1600s were a time of great upheaval and exploration. European powers were extending their reach across oceans, while indigenous societies were navigating unprecedented changes. Within this turbulence, there were forces both spiritual and political, visible and invisible, at play. The Grail Blood, if it truly existed beyond legend, would have been both a blessing and a burden, a hidden force shaping events quietly, its presence felt by those attuned to it, but remaining invisible to the casual observer. The narratives of secret bloodlines are not unique to Europe. Across the globe, mythologies speak of chosen families, sacred inheritances, and hidden wisdom passed through generations. The intersection of these traditions with European Grail lore in the New World creates a tapestry of mystery and possibility that challenges conventional history. Pocahontas' life, though often sanitized for popular storytelling, may have been deeply enmeshed in these currents, a living conduit between two worlds, carrying knowledge and lineage that were never meant to be revealed openly. As we begin to explore this hidden legacy, it is important to set aside the comfortable certainty of recorded history. The Grail, in its truest form, is not something one finds on a shelf or behind a glass case in a museum. It is a secret carried through generations, a force woven into bloodlines, families, and destinies. To uncover it, we must look beyond documents and archives and instead consider the subtle signs, the patterns, and the stories that have persisted in whispers. These fragments, when pieced together, may reveal a path leading not to gold or silver, but to understanding the hidden architecture of history itself, a history in which Pocahontas, and the forbidden legacy she may have carried, plays a central role. By tracing these hidden threads, we step into a world that few dare to explore, where the line between myth and history blurs, and where the ordinary tales of the past give way to extraordinary possibilities. This is a journey not only through time, but through the layers of secrecy and suppression that have shaped the narratives we think we know. As we move forward, we will uncover hints of sacred bloodlines, cryptic symbols, and historical mysteries that suggest Pocahontas' story is far more than the familiar legend. It is a key to understanding a hidden inheritance, a legacy that reaches across continents, centuries, and civilizations, quietly influencing the course of history. Pocahontas is a name that has traveled through time, woven into stories, songs, and history books, yet rarely is she understood in the full complexity of her life. To many, she is a figure of innocence and myth, the young Native American woman who saved John Smith, the mediator between two worlds, the symbol of peace in a turbulent age. But beneath this familiar narrative lies a life shaped by forces far larger than herself, forces that may have intersected with secrets and legacies not often spoken of in mainstream history. To truly understand her role, we must look beyond the simple romanticized tale and examine her life through the lens of the hidden, the forbidden, and the mysterious. Pocahontas was born around 1596 in the territory of the Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful network of Algonquian-speaking tribes in what is now Virginia. From her earliest days, she existed within a world of intricate political alliances, spiritual beliefs, and familial obligations. Her father, Chief Powhatan, was not merely a tribal leader. He was a figure of immense influence, navigating the pressures of European colonization while maintaining the sovereignty and traditions of his people. It was a world where knowledge was passed not only through words, but through ritual, ceremony, and the silent understanding of inherited wisdom. A world in which a young woman like Pocahontas could hold influence far beyond what is immediately visible. Historical records paint a fragmented portrait of her life, often filtered through the perspectives of European observers. These accounts describe her as curious, intelligent, and unusually poised for someone so young. She learned to navigate both her own culture and the encroaching European presence with remarkable skill. Yet these records rarely delve into her inner world, the traditions she inherited, or the subtle power she may have carried through her lineage. What remains is a tantalizing mystery. Could Pocahontas' prominence have been more than political or cultural? Could she, through blood and heritage, have carried a hidden legacy that connected her to forces and histories long obscured by time? European colonists often recorded their interactions with native peoples with a mixture of awe, fear, and misunderstanding. To them, Pocahontas appeared extraordinary, almost otherworldly. Her ability to bridge cultures, to influence her father's decisions, and to negotiate with the English was remarkable for a woman of her age. Yet, there are subtle hints in these accounts, mentions of unusual insight, intuition, and presence that suggest something beyond mere diplomacy. Some modern theorists speculate that Pocahontas' lineage, like the mysterious Grail bloodlines of Europe, carried a form of inherited wisdom or sacred influence, a subtle current of power flowing quietly through her actions and decisions. Her encounter with the English, particularly with John Smith, has been immortalized in legend. Yet these events are far more complex than the popular story suggests. Pocahontas' interventions were not merely acts of youthful bravery. They were strategic, informed by a deep understanding of the delicate balance of power between her people and the foreign settlers. The traditional narrative frames her as a passive figure caught in historical events, but the truth may point to someone who is very much aware of her role, her potential, and perhaps even her inherited responsibilities. The story of her capture in 1613 and subsequent time in English custody adds further layers to her life's mystery. She was baptized, given the Christian name Rebecca, and immersed in a foreign culture that sought to assimilate and redefine her identity. During this period, she was exposed to European traditions, knowledge, and potentially even the whispers of Grail-related myths carried across the Atlantic by explorers and settlers. This convergence of cultures, Native American and European, spiritual and political, created a unique context in which Pocahontas stood at the crossroads of history, embodying the meeting of worlds, ideas, and perhaps secret legacies. Her marriage to John Rolfe in 1614 marked another turning point, celebrated in history as a union of peace and diplomacy. Yet, seen through the lens of hidden inheritance and legacy, it may also have been a strategic convergence of bloodlines and influence. Some suggest that through alliances, intermarriage, and the subtle movement of knowledge, Pocahontas' lineage could have been preserved in ways that were invisible to the broader colonial society. The implications of such unions extend far beyond the personal, potentially touching on networks of power, hidden wisdom, and secret histories carried silently through generations. What makes Pocahontas' story particularly compelling is the contrast between legend and reality. To the European imagination, she became a symbol, a narrative convenient for promoting ideals of colonial harmony. Yet the real Pocahontas, navigating the complex interplay of family, culture, and the colonial presence, may have understood and preserved secrets that no chronicler could fully grasp. Her intelligence, adaptability, and influence suggest a figure attuned to forces both visible and hidden, a young woman whose life was entangled with mysteries that stretched far beyond the shores of Virginia. Even in her death in 1617, far from her homeland, Pocahontas' story leaves lingering questions. Was her life simply a footnote in the expansion of the English Empire, or did it carry a more profound significance, a hidden thread of lineage, knowledge, and sacred inheritance, quietly woven into the fabric of history? By exploring her life not as a legend alone, but as a potential vessel of secret legacy, we begin to see the extraordinary possibilities that history often obscures. Pocahontas' story reminds us that history is rarely as simple as it seems. It is layered, complex, and sometimes deliberately veiled. Beneath the familiar tales of bravery, diplomacy, and romance, there may lie a narrative of hidden inheritance, sacred bloodlines, and forbidden legacies. As we continue this journey, we will uncover the ways in which her life intersects with mysteries far older than the New World itself, hinting at a continuity of sacred lineage that transcends continents, centuries, and civilizations. Pocahontas, often remembered in legend as a bridge between peoples, may have been much more than that. She may have been a living link in a chain of secret inheritance, a subtle yet powerful presence carrying a forbidden legacy into the very heart of history. Long before Pocahontas' time, whispers of forbidden lineages circulated quietly through the courts and monasteries of Europe. These were not lineages that history openly recorded, but bloodlines believed to carry a unique, sacred inheritance, a heritage tied to divine favor, hidden knowledge, and extraordinary influence. Known to some as the Grail Blood, these lineages were carefully guarded, preserved in secret marriages, and transmitted through generations with the utmost discretion. They were the bloodlines that could shape kingdoms, guide empires, and influence events in ways that ordinary history could never fully reveal. The question that slowly emerges is whether such a lineage could have reached far beyond Europe, quietly entwining itself with the people and lands of the New World, and perhaps with Pocahontas herself. In Europe, the most famous accounts of these bloodlines often center around the royal houses of France, Britain, and Spain. The Merovingians, for instance, were rumored to possess a lineage that was not merely royal, but sacred, intertwined with the mysteries of Christ himself. Their supposed descendants were hidden, their connections obfuscated, and their influence maintained through clandestine means. Similarly, secret societies like the Knights Templar were more than guardians of wealth. They were rumored to safeguard knowledge of sacred bloodlines, using their positions of power to protect these legacies from prying eyes. While mainstream history often dismisses these tales as myth or conspiracy, the consistency of whispers across centuries suggests a deeper truth hiding in plain sight. These European bloodlines, steeped in secrecy and protected by ritual, may have crossed oceans long before Pocahontas' birth. Trade, colonization, and missionary work provided avenues for the subtle movement of people, knowledge, and influence. European explorers did not come to the New World merely to claim land or treasure. Some were driven by hidden agendas, seeking to identify, align, or even manipulate bloodlines that carried sacred significance. It is within this context that Pocahontas' family and lineage must be considered. Could it be that her family's prominence, intelligence, and adaptability were not merely cultural or political traits, but inherited attributes of a bloodline recognized, even across continents, by those attuned to the subtle currents of sacred inheritance? Examining Pocahontas' ancestry requires a careful blend of historical records, oral traditions, and speculative insight. The Powhatan Confederacy was a complex and sophisticated society with a deep understanding of genealogy and spiritual inheritance. Lineage mattered, not only for leadership, but for the transmission of wisdom, sacred knowledge, and societal roles. In such a society, the possibility that a line could intersect with the Grail Blood or other sacred European lineages is not entirely impossible. While the historical record does not explicitly state such connections, subtle hints and anomalies suggest the presence of something extraordinary. Certain marriages, alliances, and social prominence may have been less random than they appear, hinting at an invisible thread linking North America to the hidden histories of Europe. The idea of forbidden bloodlines challenges our understanding of history itself. It implies that what we see in textbooks, kings, explorers, and settlers, is only a surface layer, while beneath lies a network of influence shaped by hidden inheritance. Pocahontas' story, often framed in the context of diplomacy and colonial intrigue, may have also been shaped by this hidden network. Her unique position as the daughter of a powerful chief placed her at a nexus of cultural, spiritual, and perhaps even genetic intersections. Through her, the currents of sacred lineage could flow quietly into the emerging society of the New World, carried forward without recognition or fanfare. European fascination with bloodlines was not limited to royalty or nobility. It extended to the idea that certain families carried traits that were extraordinary, heightened intelligence, insight, or spiritual sensitivity, attributes often framed as divine favor. In a sense, this created a hidden hierarchy, one invisible to ordinary citizens but palpable to those in positions of awareness or authority. If Pocahontas' family intersected with such lineages, even partially, it would explain some of the remarkable circumstances of her life. Her diplomatic skill, her ability to navigate the perilous politics of both her own people and the colonists, and the attention she attracted from powerful Europeans. Some historians and researchers point to anomalies in genealogical records, the movement of families across continents, and subtle hints in colonial documentation as evidence of these intersections. For example, European explorers and settlers often recorded the presence of unusual rituals, names, or practices among native leaders that suggested a connection to European traditions unknown to most of their contemporaries. Could these records be hinting at a convergence of bloodlines? Could they indicate that the Grail Blood, or at least the knowledge of its existence, had quietly reached the shores of the New World, carried not by conquest alone, but through lineage and influence? The secrecy surrounding these bloodlines was deliberate. Families, societies, and orders invested immense effort in maintaining the concealment of their heritage. Knowledge of sacred lineage could be dangerous. It could invite political machinations, threats, and persecution. Thus, these inheritances were protected not only by tradition, but by careful orchestration. Marriages arranged to preserve the line, alliances formed to ensure survival, and stories deliberately obfuscated or hidden. Pocahontas' position, then, may have been more than coincidental. Her family's prominence, her interactions with Europeans, and her enduring influence may all be interpreted as subtle evidence of a hidden legacy, carefully preserved in plain sight. Exploring these theories requires a balance between skepticism and imagination. While the evidence is largely circumstantial, patterns emerge that cannot easily be dismissed. When viewed through the lens of sacred lineage, the movements of people, the alliances formed, and the attention she received take on new significance. Pocahontas may not have been merely a cultural intermediary. She may have been a living conduit for a forbidden legacy, a vessel through which sacred inheritance traveled quietly from one continent to another, weaving its influence into the unfolding history of the Americas. By considering the possibility of forbidden bloodlines, we open the door to a new understanding of Pocahontas' life, one in which her story is not only remarkable for her courage and diplomacy, but also for her potential connection to hidden legacies that have shaped history across continents and centuries. This perspective challenges conventional narratives, asking us to look beyond what is written and to consider what has been deliberately concealed. In doing so, we begin to glimpse a world where the sacred, the hidden, and the forbidden intersect with the familiar, creating a tapestry of history that is as intricate as it is mysterious, and as powerful as it is invisible. The vast, uncharted lands of the New World held more than opportunity for wealth and territory. To the European explorers who arrived in the early 1600s, these shores also represented a chance to uncover secrets lost to time, mysteries whispered in the shadowed halls of monasteries and royal courts. Some of these adventurers were not merely motivated by gold or colonization. They were driven by a deeper, more enigmatic pursuit, the search for sacred knowledge and, perhaps, the elusive bloodlines linked to the Holy Grail. Their voyages were meticulously planned, guided by maps, cryptic symbols, and oral legends that had traveled across generations. Among the dense forests and rivers of Virginia, they sought not only the land itself, but the hidden legacies that might shape the future of nations. These European Grail seekers came from a world in which the line between myth and reality was often blurred. The stories of the Grail, of sacred bloodlines, and of divine inheritance were not merely fanciful tales. They were treated with a reverence that could dictate life and death, alliances and betrayals. Some of these seekers were knights or their descendants. Others were scholars, clerics, and courtiers, all aware of the immense power carried by hidden lineages. Their understanding of the Grail was not simplistic. They knew it was not merely a cup or relic to be found, but a living inheritance, woven through blood and symbol, a secret that had survived centuries of conflict and suppression. When they set foot on the shores of the Americas, these explorers carried more than ships and weapons. They carried the weight of history, coded knowledge, and a purpose that few could understand. They observed the lands, the rivers, and the native peoples with a careful, almost obsessive attention, looking for patterns, symbols, and lines of influence that could reveal the presence of sacred bloodlines. Among the tribes of Virginia, they recorded details that might seem mundane to ordinary observers: the alignment of settlements, the prominence of certain families, the ceremonies and rituals performed by leaders. Yet, for those attuned to hidden knowledge, these details were potentially clues pointing to a lineage worth preserving or controlling. In this context, the arrival of Pocahontas and her family gains new significance. To these European seekers, her father, Chief Powhatan, was not merely a tribal leader. He was a gatekeeper to knowledge, traditions, and bloodlines that might intersect with their sacred quests. Pocahontas, as his daughter, was more than a child of diplomacy and cultural negotiation. She may have been recognized as a figure of unique importance, a living symbol of continuity, intelligence, and influence. Her presence was a signpost in a world that Europeans believed was guided by secret, divine forces, a world in which bloodlines mattered as much as armies, and knowledge passed silently could be more powerful than conquest itself. The Europeans who came in pursuit of these hidden truths often operated in secrecy, aware that their quests could be met with resistance or misinterpretation. Some recorded their observations in cryptic notes and coded journals. Others relied on symbols and allegory to communicate across generations. Maps, both literal and symbolic, became tools of their mission. Rivers might indicate paths of influence. Settlements might conceal clues to sacred alliances, and interactions with native leaders might serve as tests of insight or recognition. Every encounter was an opportunity to uncover the threads of hidden inheritance, to detect patterns that could reveal the presence of something far older and more sacred than the new colonies themselves. It is within this framework that the role of Pocahontas becomes increasingly intriguing. Her interactions with English explorers were not random or coincidental. They were observed, recorded, and interpreted by individuals attuned to the subtleties of influence and inheritance. She demonstrated an extraordinary awareness of the dynamics around her, negotiating not only for the safety of her people, but perhaps also participating, unknowingly or knowingly, in the preservation of a sacred legacy. Her intelligence, adaptability, and insight suggest that her life was part of a larger, unseen narrative, one in which the Grail's hidden bloodlines were not merely European, but potentially converging with indigenous lineages in ways that history has rarely acknowledged. These early explorers often left behind hints of their true purposes, buried in documents that modern researchers can only partially decode. Notes about unusual ceremonies, mentions of families with unexpected prominence, and cryptic references to European lineages among native leaders suggest an obsessive attention to what could be called hidden inheritance. Some historians propose that certain European figures in Virginia were actively seeking to identify, preserve, or even manipulate these lines, creating subtle alliances with families like Pocahontas to ensure the continuation of sacred knowledge. Every treaty, marriage proposal, and interaction could have been influenced by this concealed agenda, a silent chess game played across continents and cultures. It is also possible that European Grail seekers were drawn by legends that predated colonization, stories passed down in secret societies or obscure manuscripts, suggesting the arrival of a chosen lineage in the Americas. Such legends may have described a convergence of bloodlines, a fusion of wisdom, or the manifestation of sacred inheritance in a new world. Whether these accounts were fact, rumor, or deliberate myth-making, they guided the actions of explorers and settlers, subtly shaping the trajectory of the colonies and framing the lives of figures like Pocahontas within a larger, almost mystical context. The tension between exploration and obsession, between discovery and secrecy, is a defining feature of this period. European settlers brought not only ambition and violence, but also curiosity and reverence for knowledge that had been preserved for centuries. Some of these individuals recognized the potential significance of Pocahontas' family, and perhaps even her as an individual, in ways that went far beyond diplomacy or trade. They may have seen her as a key, a bridge, or even a guardian of hidden inheritance, a living connection to lineages whose full significance was only whispered in Europe's most secret circles. As we explore this story, it becomes clear that the arrival of European Grail seekers in the New World was not simply an historical footnote. It was a convergence of ambition, mystery, and sacred pursuit. Pocahontas' life intersects with this convergence in ways that are subtle but profound, suggesting that her story, often told as a tale of cultural negotiation and romance, may have carried far deeper implications. In the forests and rivers of Virginia, a hidden drama unfolded, one of sacred bloodlines, secret quests, and forbidden knowledge. And at the center of it, quietly, was a young woman whose presence would ripple across continents and centuries, leaving traces of a forbidden legacy that history has largely forgotten. In the wilderness of the New World, beneath the towering forests and along the winding rivers, there lay secrets that were invisible to the untrained eye. These were not just geographical features or natural resources to be exploited. They were symbols, patterns, and markers that hinted at something far older and more profound. European explorers, particularly those obsessed with the Grail and its hidden bloodlines, believed that the New World itself could hold traces of sacred inheritance. Maps, artifacts, and subtle alignments in settlements were read not only as practical guides, but as coded messages, clues left by the forces that had shaped history in secret. Some of the earliest colonial maps are enigmatic in ways that historians have only begun to scratch the surface of. Rivers might curve deliberately. Settlements might be placed according to angles and lines that echo ancient European sacred geometry, and hills or ceremonial grounds might align with celestial markers. To the casual observer, these were simply practical choices dictated by terrain and resources. But to those attuned to esoteric knowledge, these layouts suggested a deliberate orchestration, a hidden language of the land itself. Some theorists propose that European settlers, familiar with Grail lore and sacred bloodlines, were actively searching for places that resonated with these ancient symbols, hoping to identify sites of significance where hidden inheritance might manifest. Artifacts found in early colonial settlements provide further clues. Everyday objects, pottery, ceremonial items, even personal jewelry, sometimes carry symbols reminiscent of Grail iconography or European mystical traditions. These items, often dismissed as decorative or purely functional, may have served as markers, tokens, or keys to understanding a deeper narrative. Symbols of circles, spirals, or interlocking patterns appear repeatedly, echoing motifs preserved in Europe for centuries by secret societies. The presence of such items in native and colonial contexts suggests a subtle exchange of knowledge, a dialogue between cultures that operated beneath the surface of recorded history. Even place names carry hidden meaning. The colonists brought with them a fascination for classical and mystical nomenclature, often overlaying European symbolism onto indigenous geography. Names of rivers, villages, and clearings may seem arbitrary at first glance, but some researchers argue that they follow patterns known to those initiated in sacred traditions, a way to encode maps with a knowledge that could guide future generations. These names acted as markers, guiding the observant or the initiated towards sites of importance, subtly preserving a connection to a legacy that had been nurtured for centuries in secrecy. There is also the suggestion that native traditions themselves may have interacted with these symbolic systems. Indigenous tribes maintained sophisticated knowledge of the land, encoded in stories, rituals, and ceremonial practices. Chiefs and elders carried wisdom that transcended generations, encompassing astronomy, navigation, and the hidden properties of natural landscapes. In this context, the arrival of Europeans with their own symbolic frameworks may have created a unique fusion, a dialogue between indigenous understanding and European sacred lore. Pocahontas, positioned at the intersection of these worlds, may have been uniquely attuned to these patterns, her life bridging not just cultures, but potentially the subtle currents of sacred knowledge carried by bloodlines. Artifacts and documents from this period often contain curious anomalies. Diaries of explorers occasionally reference strange markings or hidden messages in settlement layouts, inscriptions carved into trees, or ceremonial grounds that seem to follow invisible lines of power. Some scholars speculate that these are remnants of attempts to preserve and communicate knowledge that could not be openly recorded. The hidden Grail bloodlines may have been represented in these subtle forms, a way to leave a trace of sacred inheritance in the New World while avoiding the scrutiny of colonists, missionaries, or rival powers who might have sought to suppress such secrets. Even European scholars who traveled with explorers noted the precision with which certain settlements were organized. Some early English accounts remark on the striking symmetry of native villages or the placement of ceremonial spaces in ways that corresponded to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. To those familiar with sacred geometry and mystical traditions, these alignments could not be dismissed as coincidence. They suggested knowledge of patterns, a deliberate awareness of forces beyond the visible, and perhaps even a recognition of sacred inheritance. Pocahontas' family, central to the Powhatan Confederacy, would have been intimately involved in these spatial, spiritual, and symbolic practices, making her an observer, and possibly a participant, in the convergence of hidden European and indigenous wisdom. The interplay of symbols, maps, and artifacts creates a tantalizing puzzle. Were the Europeans who arrived in Virginia simply documenting what they saw, or were they interpreting signs of sacred bloodlines they had been trained to recognize? And conversely, were the indigenous peoples aware of these symbolic layers, consciously preserving their own understanding while encountering foreknowledge? Pocahontas stands at the heart of this puzzle, a figure whose life may have been subtly guided by awareness of these patterns, whose influence and presence may have been recognized by those searching for signs of sacred inheritance. Beyond objects and maps, there are oral traditions that hint at encoded knowledge. Stories passed down within families often describe figures of unusual insight or mysterious origins, and sometimes reference events or individuals in ways that mirror European legends. In combination with artifacts and settlement patterns, these oral histories suggest that both indigenous and European actors may have been engaged in a quiet dialogue across cultures, a dialogue concerned with hidden lineages, sacred knowledge, and the preservation of a legacy that few were meant to fully comprehend. As we examine these hidden symbols and sacred maps, it becomes increasingly clear that the New World was not merely a backdrop for colonial ambition. It was a landscape imbued with layers of meaning, carefully observed, interpreted, and sometimes manipulated by those attuned to secrets older than the continents themselves. Pocahontas, living at the intersection of these cultures and currents, may have been more than a historical figure. She may have been a living nexus for a convergence of sacred knowledge, a custodian of subtle clues and hidden inheritance that history has only glimpsed in fragments. In this way, the New World itself emerges as a coded landscape, a repository for traces of forbidden legacies and sacred bloodlines. Rivers, hills, ceremonial grounds, maps, artifacts, and oral traditions all weave together to form a complex network of hidden meaning. European grail seekers and indigenous custodians alike may have recognized the significance of these patterns, and it is within this framework that we begin to understand the deeper possibilities of Pocahontas' life. She was not merely a child of diplomacy or legend. She may have been an active participant, a witness, and perhaps even a guardian of a legacy that stretched across continents, time, and the hidden currents of history. The collision of worlds that Pocahontas lived through was not merely political or cultural. It was profoundly spiritual. In the early 1600s, the landscapes of Virginia carried an invisible tapestry of beliefs, rituals, and knowledge systems. Native peoples, including the Powhatan Confederacy, had for generations cultivated deep spiritual understanding of the land, of the cycles of nature, and of the forces that governed life. Their ceremonies, stories, and social structures were infused with a kind of sacred wisdom, an intricate web of knowledge that guided leadership, marriage, and the transmission of influence. Europeans, by contrast, brought with them their own complex frameworks. Christian mysticism, Grail lore, and centuries of esoteric traditions passed down in secret societies. The encounter between these two systems of mysticism created an extraordinary and subtle dialogue, one that Pocahontas may have been uniquely positioned to witness, and perhaps even to influence. Native spirituality was intimately tied to lineage and ancestry. Knowledge, authority, and spiritual insight were often inherited, encoded in the lives of those chosen by family and clan to carry responsibilities across generations. Chiefs and elders served not merely as political leaders, but as guardians of this sacred inheritance, ensuring that wisdom and guidance flowed correctly through families and communities. Pocahontas, as the daughter of Chief Powhatan, was immersed from birth in this environment. Her upbringing would have exposed her to ceremonies that encoded knowledge in symbolic actions, to oral traditions that preserved historical and spiritual insight, and to a network of elders who understood the subtle ways in which lineage carried power. In such a context, it is plausible that she inherited, knowingly or unknowingly, a form of spiritual and intellectual legacy that aligned with the European ideas of sacred bloodlines, a living bridge between worlds. Meanwhile, the European colonists brought their own esoteric frameworks, deeply influenced by centuries of mystical thought. Among these were the lingering legacies of the Grail myths, Templar networks, and secret societies that believe in the transmission of sacred inheritance through bloodlines. These groups often approached exploration with dual purposes: the visible mission of colonization, and the hidden mission of seeking, preserving, or aligning with sacred lineages wherever they might appear. To them, the Americas were not simply new lands. They were a stage upon which hidden currents of power and legacy might be found. In this sense, The same rivers, forests, and settlements observed by the colonists were viewed through the lens of sacred alignment, prophecy, and inheritance. When these European seekers encountered native societies, they may have recognized patterns that resonated with their own mystical understanding. The prominence of certain families, the structured ceremonies, and the subtle transmission of wisdom from elders to children may have mirrored European concepts of lineage and sacred inheritance. In this regard, Pocahontas was more than a political figure. She was potentially a living representation of a convergence between native spiritual lineage and the European search for sacred blood. Her intelligence, diplomacy, and awareness suggest that she may have intuitively grasped these connections, moving within both worlds with a kind of fluidity that was both rare and remarkable. The exchange of knowledge, however subtle, was not always deliberate or conscious. Symbolism could emerge through ritual, art, and storytelling, creating layers of meaning that outsiders might not fully perceive. European settlers occasionally recorded ceremonies or gestures that seemed unusual, mysterious, or significant, without understanding the deeper context. Yet, these observations hint at a shared recognition that certain families, individuals, or moments were imbued with significance beyond what was immediately visible. Pocahontas' presence at these intersections, mediating, observing, and participating, positioned her within a network of spiritual and symbolic influence that few of her contemporaries could recognize. Consider, for example, the sacred dances, seasonal ceremonies, and rites of passage that marked the Powhatan Confederacy. These events were not mere performances. They were deliberate acts of transmission, embedding knowledge of the land, of ancestry, and of social responsibility into the participants. For the Europeans watching from the sidelines, the rituals may have seemed exotic, but those versed in the esoteric traditions of Europe might have seen echoes of their own mystical practices, the use of geometry, rhythm, and symbolism to preserve and communicate hidden knowledge. Pocahontas, as both participant and observer, stood at a crossroads of two systems of sacred understanding. The blending of these traditions becomes particularly fascinating when considering the role of personal relationships. Marriages, alliances, and mentorships in both native and European contexts often serve as mechanisms for consolidating influence, transmitting wisdom, and preserving lineages. Pocahontas' later marriage to John Rolfe has long been framed in history as a political alliance. Yet from the perspective of sacred inheritance, it can also be interpreted as a subtle alignment of bloodlines, a bridging of knowledge networks that span continents. The symbolic weight of such unions, blending spiritual, cultural, and genetic legacies, may have been recognized by those attuned to hidden histories, adding layers of significance to what appears in historical records as simple diplomacy. There are also artifacts and symbols that survive from this period which suggest this subtle confluence. European settlers left behind maps, personal effects, and records that indicate awareness of sacred lineages, often encoded in ways meant to protect the knowledge from casual discovery. Native practices preserved complementary forms of symbolism, carvings, ceremonial tools, and oral narratives that encoded ancestral wisdom. When viewed together, these artifacts hint at a shared understanding that certain lineages, places, and individuals carried significance that could influence events across generations. Pocahontas, navigating both systems, may have functioned as a guardian or bridge, her life mediating between the visible and invisible, the ordinary and the sacred. The implications of this intersection are profound. It suggests that the history of early colonial America was not merely a story of conquest, survival, and diplomacy, but also a subtle interplay of hidden currents, sacred legacies, and spiritual inheritance. Pocahontas' unique position allowed her to occupy a space in which these currents converged, making her life a living example of the ways in which native and European mystical traditions could intersect. The convergence is not always explicit, but the patterns emerge through careful study of lineage, ritual, symbolism, and historical accounts. By examining the intersections of native and European mysticism, we begin to see Pocahontas not merely as a historical figure caught in the tides of colonial expansion, but as a pivotal participant in a hidden narrative. She was a bridge across cultures, a vessel of inherited knowledge, and a figure whose life hints at the convergence of sacred bloodlines and esoteric wisdom. The subtle dialogues, the rituals, and the symbolism surrounding her point toward a reality in which history, spirituality, and inheritance were deeply intertwined, shaping events in ways that remain largely unrecognized. As we continue to explore the story of Pocahontas and the forbidden legacy she may have carried, it becomes clear that her life was more than legend, more than diplomacy, and more than survival. It was a living intersection of worlds, spiritual, cultural, and secret, in which sacred inheritance and hidden knowledge quietly influenced the course of history. To understand her fully, we must trace these threads further, uncovering the hidden alliances, symbols, and legacies that converge in ways both visible and invisible, revealing a story that is as profound as it is forbidden. The early years of colonial Virginia were marked by a delicate balance of power, a dance between the newcomers and the native populations, each side navigating alliances, threats, and opportunities. Yet beneath this surface of diplomacy and survival, there may have been currents of influence far subtler and more profound. A network of hidden knowledge, sacred inheritance, and forbidden legacy shaping events behind the scenes. Pocahontas, as a figure of prominence, stood at the center of this intricate web, her life quietly intertwined with forces that sought to preserve, recognize, or perhaps manipulate sacred bloodlines across continents. European settlers, particularly those with awareness of Grail lore or esoteric traditions, understood that power did not reside solely in arms or wealth. Influence flowed through blood, lineage, and strategic alliances. They carefully observed which families held sway, which leaders demonstrated insight and diplomacy, and which individuals seemed to carry an almost intangible authority. Chief Powhatan's confederacy represented not only political power, but also, potentially, a convergence of spiritual and hereditary significance. His daughter, Pocahontas, embodied both the visible authority of her position and the hidden potential of inherited influence, making her an object of both respect and intrigue for those seeking forbidden knowledge. The political landscape of early Virginia was fraught with tension. European settlers struggled to establish footholds while managing fragile relations with multiple native tribes, each with their own hierarchies, rivalries, and traditions. The Europeans' awareness of sacred bloodlines added another layer to this already complex environment. Observing, recording, and interpreting patterns of leadership, settlement, and ceremony, they sought to align themselves with lineages that carried perceived spiritual weight. Pocahontas' interactions with key figures, her knowledge of local politics, and her extraordinary adaptability may have marked her as someone uniquely attuned to these hidden currents, a bridge between worlds whose influence extended beyond her immediate environment. Marriage and alliance were central tools in the transmission and preservation of power. Within both European and native societies, unions were rarely purely personal. They served to consolidate influence, preserve bloodlines, and ensure continuity of knowledge. Pocahontas' later marriage to John Rolfe has often been portrayed as a simple act of diplomacy, a means to secure peace between her people and the English. Yet viewed through the lens of sacred inheritance, it can also be interpreted as a deliberate alignment of lineages, a quiet convergence of European and indigenous networks of knowledge and influence. The symbolic resonance of this union may have been recognized by those attuned to the deeper currents of history, adding a subtle but profound layer to an event otherwise seen as political expediency. Political intrigue in early Virginia was a careful negotiation of loyalty, observation, and power. European settlers were acutely aware that alliances could be fragile, and that control of knowledge, both practical and esoteric, could determine survival. They recorded their observations meticulously, noting which native leaders exhibited foresight, wisdom, or unusual insight. Chief Powhatan's leadership and the prominence of Pocahontas within his circle would not have escaped their notice. To those seeking sacred inheritance, she may have represented more than a child of diplomacy. She may have been a living key, connecting the European understanding of lineage with the subtle, inherited authority of indigenous leadership. Even minor ceremonies and gestures held significance. Observers often remarked on the precision and meaning of rituals, from seasonal festivals to symbolic dances, noting details that seemed unusual, even extraordinary, to outsiders. These rituals encoded knowledge of ancestry, spiritual connection, and societal responsibility. European seekers familiar with sacred traditions may have interpreted these acts as signs of alignment with hidden bloodlines. Pocahontas' participation in these rituals, her awareness of their subtleties, and her ability to navigate them with grace and understanding further cemented her role as a figure of convergence, a bridge between European fascination with lineage and the indigenous transmission of sacred inheritance. The interplay of diplomacy, ritual, and hidden knowledge created a landscape in which influence was invisible yet powerful. Decisions made quietly, relationships cultivated strategically, and attention paid to subtle signs could determine outcomes as much as military force or political treaties. Pocahontas' life, situated at the center of this network, illustrates the delicate balance between visible authority and hidden influence. She understood, perhaps instinctively, perhaps through inherited wisdom, how to operate within these dual realities, earning respect and navigating challenges in ways that transcended simple diplomacy. Colonial records hint at the recognition of this influence, though always framed in European terms. Observers commented on Pocahontas' intelligence, her foresight, and her capacity to mediate complex situations. They noted her unusual ability to interpret both human behavior and natural patterns, qualities often associated with those who carried sacred inheritance in European mystical traditions. While these accounts were filtered through a colonial lens, they reveal a pattern. Pocahontas was consistently acknowledged as someone exceptional, whose presence commanded attention and whose actions resonated far beyond what her immediate position might suggest. The delicate balance of alliances extended to her interactions with other influential figures. European settlers, missionaries, and traders each had their own interests, yet they all recognized her significance. Native leaders similarly understood her influence, acknowledging her unique ability to navigate both worlds. This dual recognition, from European seekers of hidden lineage and from her own people, suggests that Pocahontas' role may have been more than political or social. She may have functioned as a living nexus of influence, a guardian of subtle knowledge, and a link between sacred currents of inheritance from both continents. Even as colonial pressures intensified, Pocahontas maintained her position within these complex networks. Her movements, alliances, and choices reflect a sophisticated awareness of the subtle interplay between visible power and hidden influence. The patterns of interaction, marriage, and diplomacy she engaged in can be interpreted not only as acts of survival, but as participation in a quiet preservation of legacy. In this sense, Pocahontas' story transcends conventional history, revealing a dimension in which sacred inheritance, hidden knowledge, and personal agency intersect. The early colonial period, then, is revealed not as a simple story of conquest or adaptation, but as a landscape shaped by unseen forces. The convergence of European seekers of sacred bloodlines and indigenous traditions of spiritual inheritance created a world in which ordinary actions could carry extraordinary significance. Pocahontas, as a figure at the center of this convergence, exemplifies the subtle but profound influence of hidden legacy on the course of history. Her life illustrates how diplomacy, ritual, and personal agency can intertwine with sacred inheritance, creating a narrative that challenges the assumptions of conventional historiography. In understanding this, we begin to see that history is layered, and that the lives of extraordinary individuals like Pocahontas cannot be fully understood through political events alone. There is a hidden dimension, a network of knowledge, lineage, and sacred influence that operates quietly beneath the surface. Pocahontas' navigation of these currents, her relationships with both European and indigenous leaders, and her participation in alliances and rituals suggest that she was more than a historical figure of legend. She was a custodian of hidden legacy, a bridge between cultures and bloodlines, and a living testament to the ways in which sacred inheritance quietly shapes the world. Long before the arrival of English settlers, the Powhatan people carried a rich tapestry of stories, songs, and prophecies woven into the very fabric of their culture. These narratives were not merely entertainment or moral lessons. They were repositories of knowledge, memory, and guidance, passed down through generations to preserve wisdom about the world, the land, and the unseen forces that govern it. Among these stories were hints of sacred power, ancestral connections, and cosmic cycles that shaped both the individual and the community. When examined closely, certain myths reveal patterns and symbols that resonate with European Grail legends, suggesting a remarkable convergence of esoteric themes across continents. One of the most compelling aspects of Powhatan prophecy is its focus on lineage, continuity, and sacred responsibility. Leaders and warriors were often understood to carry the weight of ancestral knowledge, tasked with protecting and preserving it for future generations. These teachings were layered with metaphor and allegory, accessible only to those initiated into their deeper meanings. Pocahontas, as the daughter of Chief Powhatan, inherited not just political authority, but also spiritual responsibility. Her role was inextricably linked to prophecy, positioning her as a living bridge between her people and forces that extended beyond the visible world. Some scholars suggest that native prophecies contain subtle parallels to European Grail myths, particularly the emphasis on a chosen bloodline and the safeguarding of sacred knowledge. While the Grail is often imagined as a physical object, these prophecies and legends frame it as a living legacy, a continuity of wisdom preserved through select individuals and families. Pocahontas, in this interpretation, is more than a historical figure. She is a symbolic embodiment of this continuity, a guardian of secrets that her people understood to be vital, yet which colonial records largely overlooked or dismissed. Oral traditions provide additional layers of intrigue. Stories of celestial signs, mysterious travelers, and sacred rituals hint at encounters with forces beyond ordinary human comprehension. Certain songs and ceremonies, preserved through subtle shifts in language and rhythm, encode knowledge that may have once been shared with trusted outsiders or interpreted alongside esoteric symbols from distant lands. When these narratives are compared with European myths, a pattern emerges. Recurring motifs of journeys, unions, and hidden treasures, both literal and spiritual, suggest a shared human fascination with guarding the sacred and transmitting it through generations. The convergence of native prophecy and European esoteric tradition raises profound questions. Could these seemingly separate streams of knowledge have intersected when English settlers arrived? Did figures like Pocahontas serve as intermediaries, consciously or unconsciously, between two worlds of hidden understanding? Evidence suggests that early contact was more than a mere meeting of cultures. It was a convergence of traditions, symbols, and wisdom, each influencing and reflecting the other in subtle yet enduring ways. Through this lens, the myths and prophecies of the Powhatan people become more than cultural artifacts. They're clues to a hidden architecture of knowledge, encoded in narrative, song, and ritual. Pocahontas' life, viewed through the prism of these prophecies, reveals her as both participant and guardian, a figure whose destiny was intertwined with forces both ancestral and universal. In exploring these connections, we begin to glimpse a broader, more mysterious story, one in which indigenous prophecy and European legend converge, creating a hidden legacy that transcends geography, culture, and time. Even today, echoes of these myths and prophecies linger in subtle ways, in songs, ceremonies, and family stories, hinting at truths that were never meant to be fully exposed, yet cannot be entirely hidden. They remind us that history is not merely the sum of written records, but also the enduring resonance of stories carried in memory, preserved in symbolism, and whispered across generations. Pocahontas, her bloodline, and her legacy stand at the intersection of these worlds, a living testament to the enduring power of prophecy, myth, and the sacred knowledge that survives in unexpected forms. Long before the arrival of English settlers, the Powhatan people carried a rich and intricate tapestry of stories, songs, and prophecies woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. These were far more than simple tales. They were living vessels of wisdom, memory, and guidance, carefully preserved across generations. Each story contained multiple layers of meaning, blending history with myth, moral lessons with spiritual truths, and human experience with cosmic insight. Within these narratives were hints of sacred power, ancestral responsibility, and hidden knowledge, threads of understanding that linked the people of the Powhatan Confederacy to forces larger than themselves, forces that were both natural and supernatural, temporal and eternal. Among the most compelling aspects of Powhatan prophecy was its focus on lineage and continuity. Leaders, warriors, and prominent families were understood to carry not just political or social authority, but also spiritual weight. They were entrusted with protecting knowledge that could shape the future, ensuring that their wisdom survived the cycles of life and death. In this way, every act of governance, every decision in diplomacy or warfare was infused with a sacred dimension. The chief's daughter, Pocahontas, inherited this responsibility in a unique way. She was not merely a child of her people. She was a living embodiment of prophecy, positioned at a delicate crossroads between her own cultural heritage and the intrusion of European forces. Her life, choices, and movements were intertwined with visions, predictions, and sacred expectations that may have guided her family and her people for generations. The prophecies themselves often carried subtle parallels to European Grail myths, though they were expressed in a distinctly Powhatan idiom. Whereas the Grail in European legend is frequently imagined as a physical cup or object of power, Powhatan prophecy framed sacred inheritance as continuity of wisdom and the protection of certain bloodlines. Certain individuals, marked by lineage, were believed to carry the essence of ancestral knowledge, capable of preserving spiritual truths and acting as guardians of sacred understanding. In this context, Pocahontas' unique position as both daughter of the chief and participant in transatlantic interactions takes on profound significance. She becomes not just a historical figure, but a linchpin in a lineage of spiritual and cultural preservation, a living bridge connecting ancestral prophecy with the potential for transference into new worlds. Oral traditions provide additional insight into this hidden architecture of knowledge. Stories of celestial signs, mysterious travelers, sacred ceremonies, and natural omens recur throughout Powhatan narratives. These stories were often encoded in metaphor and symbolism, accessible primarily to those initiated into the deeper meanings of their culture. Songs, chants, and ceremonial rites served as mnemonic devices, embedding lessons about ethics, leadership, cosmology, and the natural order into performative acts that were both educational and mystical. Some rituals were intimately tied to the seasons, to celestial cycles, and to the land itself, demonstrating an acute awareness of timing, pattern, and the interconnectedness of all things. When considered alongside European esoteric traditions, these narratives take on a curious resonance. Elements such as sacred journeys, initiation rites, and the protection of wisdom echo Grail myths, suggesting that similar human concerns, preservation of knowledge, continuity of lineage, and spiritual guardianship, emerge independently across cultures. The arrival of English settlers introduced a profound disruption to this intricate system. Contact between Powhatan leaders and colonists was frequently portrayed in colonial records as a series of transactional negotiations, focusing on trade, alliances, and land. Yet, viewed through the lens of prophecy, these interactions may have held a deeper dimension. Leaders such as Powhatan may have perceived the English not merely as outsiders or threats, but as participants in a larger cosmic drama, agents whose presence could either endanger or advance sacred legacies. The choices made during this period, alliances, marriages, ceremonial exchanges, may have been influenced as much by spiritual guidance and prophecy as by immediate political concerns. Pocahontas, central to these interactions, would have been both an active participant and a symbolic carrier of prophecy, her movements carefully aligned with ancestral expectations and larger currents of hidden knowledge. The parallels between Powhatan prophecy and European Grail traditions are striking when examined closely. Both traditions emphasize the importance of lineage, the preservation of sacred knowledge, and the role of chosen individuals in maintaining continuity across generations. In Grail legends, the chosen bloodline carries a mystical inheritance, protected and transmitted by secret networks or religious orders. Similarly, Powhatan prophecy identifies certain individuals as repositories of ancestral wisdom, responsible for safeguarding the integrity of cultural and spiritual knowledge. Pocahontas' life can be seen as a nexus point where these two streams, native prophecy and European esoteric tradition, potentially converge. She is positioned as both heir and mediator, bridging cultural divides while protecting knowledge that must survive the pressures of colonization and historical erasure. Further intrigue emerges when examining specific ceremonial practices. Some ceremonies performed by Powhatan leaders involve symbolic representations of power, unity, and spiritual guardianship that may have been invisible to the colonists. These acts, though appearing mundane to outsiders, were imbued with layers of meaning accessible only to those initiated into the traditions. Certain dances, gestures, or offerings might have mirrored concepts found in European secret societies, such as initiation, the transfer of knowledge, and ritualized confirmation of status or guardianship. While no concrete evidence links these practices directly, the symbolic resonance is difficult to ignore. It suggests a subtle dialogue between worlds, a hidden exchange of ritual and meaning occurring in plain sight. Oral histories also hint at a prophetic awareness of the coming upheaval. Stories speak of change, of great journeys, and of alliances that would cross the boundaries of land and sea. In these narratives, the arrival of outsiders is framed not simply as an event to be feared or resisted, but as a challenge requiring discernment, courage, and wisdom. Pocahontas' actions, her marriage to John Rolfe, and her subsequent journey to England can be interpreted as responses to this prophetic framework, fulfilling roles that were both personal and cosmic. She becomes the embodiment of prophecy in motion, a figure navigating destiny while carrying the weight of knowledge, lineage, and cultural survival. Even today, echoes of these prophecies persist. In indigenous communities, songs, stories, and ceremonies carry vestiges of knowledge that hint at hidden dimensions of history. Across the Atlantic, European myths and Grail legends continue to echo themes of hidden bloodlines, guardianship, and sacred inheritance. When the two are juxtaposed, a pattern emerges, one suggesting that Pocahontas, her ancestry, and her life were part of a continuum of sacred knowledge stretching across continents and centuries. It is a narrative of survival, adaptation, and subtle preservation, where prophecy, myth, and historical action intertwine. This convergence encourages us to reconsider the nature of legacy and the persistence of knowledge. While the surface narrative presents colonial history, diplomacy, and romance, a deeper layer reveals guardianship, hidden continuity, and the intersection of human agency with ancestral expectation. The myths and prophecies, preserved in song, story, and ritual, serve as clues for those willing to look beyond conventional history. They hint at truths that are not immediately visible, yet persist in memory and tradition, waiting to be interpreted and understood. Pocahontas' role within this framework transforms her from a historical figure into a symbol of enduring wisdom. She embodies the interface between prophecy and action, between hidden knowledge and visible history, carrying forward a legacy that is at once deeply personal and profoundly universal. Her story, when considered through the lens of myth, legend, and prophecy, becomes a living testament to the resilience of knowledge and the power of lineage, a reminder that the threads of sacred history can survive even centuries of erasure, displacement, and reinterpretation. The richness of Powhatan mythology, when juxtaposed with European Grail narratives, offers a new lens for understanding the hidden dimensions of history. It reminds us that knowledge is often layered, encoded, and preserved through complex systems of symbol, story, and ritual. Pocahontas' life, her choices, and her ancestry exemplify the convergence of these systems, revealing a hidden tapestry of meaning that challenges conventional historical understanding and invites exploration, interpretation, and awe. Ultimately, the myths, legends, and prophecies surrounding Pocahontas are more than cultural artifacts. They are active carriers of hidden knowledge, awaiting rediscovery and reflection. They demonstrate that even in the face of colonization, suppression, and cultural loss, sacred wisdom can endure, concealed in plain sight, yet persistent across generations. Through careful listening, respectful study, and imaginative engagement, we glimpse the contours of a secret legacy, one in which Pocahontas stands at the center, a guardian of prophecy, myth, and the enduring power of hidden knowledge. The ties that bind between European orders and native leaders were far more intricate and enigmatic than most historical accounts suggest. When the English first arrived in Virginia, they entered a landscape already rich with networks of knowledge, influence, and sacred lineage, woven over generations by both indigenous communities and, perhaps unbeknownst to many, secret European societies. The story of Pocahontas, often simplified in textbooks and popular culture as a tale of diplomacy or romance, is in reality a window into a far deeper, almost imperceptible web of alliances, pacts, and guarded knowledge that spans continents. What appears at first glance to be a singular colonial encounter is, in this light, a nexus of hidden forces converging in a new world. European secret societies, ranging from the Knights Templar and Rosicrucians to lesser-known esoteric orders, were not only concerned with spiritual practice, but also with the careful protection of sacred bloodlines and the continuity of hidden knowledge. These societies have been active for centuries, guarding cryptic wisdom and orchestrating alliances in ways that were invisible to the general populace. Their influence may have extended further than conventional history allows, stretching across oceans to the Americas. The possibility arises that some early settlers were not merely traders or colonists, but carefully positioned agents within this secret network, tasked with aligning strategic marriages, acquiring critical knowledge, and monitoring interactions with powerful indigenous families. For the Powhatan Confederacy, leaders like Chief Powhatan were far from naive about the significance of the newcomers. Indigenous communities were steeped in complex systems of knowledge, prophecy, and social hierarchy, and they recognized the strategic and symbolic weight of these visitors. Some theories suggest that interactions between native leaders and European settlers were not merely diplomatic gestures, but carefully calculated exchanges conducted with an awareness of hidden dimensions, rituals, symbolism, and ancestral mandates that underscored the profound importance of bloodlines and continuity. Within this framework, Pocahontas' interactions with the English were far from incidental. She was a key participant in a network that merged political negotiation with spiritual and esoteric responsibility. Her marriage to John Rolfe, traditionally portrayed as a simple act of diplomacy or a romantic union, takes on an entirely different significance in this context. From the perspective of secret histories, it may have been a deliberate alignment of bloodlines, designed to protect sacred knowledge and ensure the survival of a lineage connected to prophecy, wisdom, and possibly Grail traditions. These were not casual alliances. They were calculated moves within a centuries-long game, where the stakes were the preservation of heritage, knowledge, and influence. Pocahontas, as both a leader's daughter and a bridge between cultures, was uniquely positioned to facilitate these connections, serving as a living conduit between the old world and the new. Letters, journals, and record from the period often appear mundane, yet subtle readings reveal hints of hidden significance. Gift exchanges, ceremonial meetings, and even seemingly innocuous interactions could be interpreted as coded communications, signals to those attuned to the networks that guided events behind the scenes. Scholars and conspiracy theorists alike have noted patterns that suggest intentional symbolism. Repeated motifs, ceremonial timings, and cross-cultural gestures that transcend the surface narrative. These elements hint at an invisible dialogue between European secret societies and native leaders, mediated in part by individuals like Pocahontas, who occupied the critical intersection of these worlds. The broader implications of these hidden alliances are staggering. They suggest a continuity of influence, whereby sacred knowledge and strategic power were preserved and transmitted across generations, even in the face of colonization, cultural disruption, and historical suppression. Pocahontas' role in this network may have ensured that both her people's traditions and elements of European esoteric wisdom survived, carefully safeguarded through lineage, ritual, and subtle social engineering. Descendants of these unions, whether fully aware of it or not, may carry within them echoes of this hidden legacy, genetic, cultural, and symbolic markers of a network that transcends conventional history. Moreover, the mechanisms of secrecy themselves were sophisticated. European orders were known to employ symbolic communication, ciphers, and coded gestures, while indigenous communities embedded guidance and prophecy in ritual, song, and narrative. The convergence of these systems in the New World created a rich lattice of hidden meanings, accessible only to those who knew how to interpret them. Pocahontas, fluent in both worlds to varying degrees, may have acted as an interpreter not just of language, but of meaning, bridging the esoteric and the practical, the visible and the hidden. In this light, her life emerges as a delicate negotiation between survival, duty, and the preservation of knowledge too valuable to be left unprotected. Artifacts and historical documents provide further evidence of these secret networks. Certain ceremonial items, symbols and portraits, and cryptic references in journals hint at connections that mainstream history has overlooked. Some objects, preserved in private collections, contain imagery or patterns that align with European esoteric traditions, while simultaneously resonating with indigenous cosmology. This duality, the mirroring of spiritual and symbolic motifs across cultures, suggests that alliances were not only practical but deeply symbolic, representing a merging of sacred knowledge that was encoded, safeguarded, and transmitted through carefully orchestrated social and familial networks. Even the political dimensions of these hidden alliances are worth noting. By strategically marrying and forging relationships, European agents could legitimize claims to territory, consolidate influence among native leaders, and protect sacred knowledge from being lost or misappropriated. Simultaneously, native leaders like Powhatan may have recognized the advantages of aligning with certain outsiders, using their knowledge of prophecy, ritual, and symbolism to guide these interactions in ways that safeguarded their own cultural and spiritual legacies. Pocahontas, as both a daughter and a bridge figure, became central to this complex balancing act, embodying the intersection of political strategy, spiritual responsibility, and hidden networks that span continents. Even centuries later, the echoes of these alliances persist. Traces remain in family histories, artifacts, and cultural practices that suggest continuity and guardianship across generations. Patterns in genealogy, symbolic traditions, and oral histories hint at a carefully maintained legacy, one that was deliberately concealed from mainstream view, but preserved nonetheless. The careful orchestration of bloodlines, rituals, and alliances speaks to a sophisticated understanding of history, secrecy, and survival, a knowledge system that operates subtly, quietly, and persistently, ensuring that essential truths endure despite centuries of cultural and political upheaval. In the final analysis, the hidden alliances and secret networks surrounding Pocahontas' life compel us to reconsider history itself. What has been presented as simple encounters, marriages, and colonial negotiations may, in reality, have been components of a far more intricate and deliberate plan. A web of guardianship, knowledge preservation, and cross-cultural exchange that transcended time and geography. Pocahontas emerges not merely as a historical figure or cultural icon, but as a linchpin in a network designed to safeguard forbidden legacies, connecting indigenous prophecy, European esoteric traditions, and the continuity of sacred bloodlines. To appreciate the depth of these hidden alliances is to recognize that history is never neutral. It is layered, encoded, and often intentionally obscured. The actions of Pocahontas and her contemporaries, when viewed through the lens of esoteric continuity and secret networks, reveal a deliberate and sophisticated orchestration that ensured the survival of knowledge, heritage, and sacred lineage. These networks, largely invisible to mainstream accounts, suggest a continuity of purpose, a hidden hand guiding events to preserve that which was most precious. The story of Pocahontas, far from being a simple narrative of diplomacy or romance, is a testament to the resilience of hidden knowledge. It illustrates how alliances, marriage, and careful negotiation were not merely tactical or political, but deeply intertwined with esoteric wisdom and sacred responsibility. Every gesture, every choice, and every interaction becomes imbued with meaning, suggesting that she was a guardian of secrets whose influence stretches across generations and continents, quietly shaping the preservation of a forbidden legacy that continues to captivate and mystify to this day. In the final reckoning, the hidden alliances and secret networks reveal a reality far richer, more complex, and more mysterious than the familiar history textbooks convey. They remind us that true history exists in layers, visible and invisible, recorded and concealed, mundane and sacred. Pocahontas stands at the center of this network, a figure of immense significance whose life embodies the delicate balance between public history and hidden truth, between the forces of revelation and suppression, and between the old world and the new. Her story, when understood in this light, becomes a doorway into a secret continuum of knowledge and influence, echoing across time, awaiting discovery by those willing to follow the subtle traces she left behind. The marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe is often portrayed as a charming historical footnote, a union that bridged two cultures and brought a measure of peace to a turbulent colony. But when examined through the lens of secret histories and hidden bloodlines, this marriage takes on a far deeper and more enigmatic significance. It was not merely a union of love or diplomacy. It may have been a carefully orchestrated act with profound political, spiritual, and esoteric implications, designed to safeguard a legacy that centuries of official history have largely ignored. In the early 1600s, European secret societies were deeply invested in the preservation and control of bloodlines believed to carry sacred knowledge. These societies were highly strategic, often arranging marriages to consolidate power, protect lineage, or hide the continuity of esoteric wisdom. Within this context, Pocahontas, a young woman of powerful indigenous heritage, may have represented more than a political ally to the English settlers. She could have been a key link in a transatlantic chain of sacred bloodlines, a living vessel through which knowledge and lineage were preserved. The marriage to John Rolfe, a man with ties to influential colonial and European networks, was perhaps no accident. It may have been a deliberate alignment, ensuring that her legacy and the secrets she carried would endure, hidden in plain sight under the guise of conventional colonial union. The circumstances surrounding the marriage were unusual and carefully staged. Pocahontas was brought to England, presented to the royal court, and immersed in European society, a world that she had never known. To the English public, it was a story of assimilation and triumph. To those attuned to the subtler currents of history, it may have been a highly symbolic act, a ceremonial acknowledgement of her unique position within the web of hidden knowledge. Every detail, the formal baptism, the elaborate wedding ceremony, and the documentation that recorded her new identity as Rebecca Rolfe, could be interpreted as layers of symbolism designed to codify her place within a lineage of sacred blood, visible only to those who knew how to read the signs. The political dimension of the marriage was equally significant. By uniting Pocahontas with Rolfe, European powers could legitimize their claims over new territories and consolidate alliances with native leaders. Yet beneath this practical narrative, there was a deeper, almost mystical purpose. Some theories suggest that the marriage functioned as a protective shield for knowledge and artifacts connected to sacred bloodlines. The union may have symbolically merged two worlds, the old and the new, the indigenous and the European, creating a living conduit for the survival of esoteric secrets that might otherwise have been lost amid the chaos of colonization. Moreover, the personal dimension of the marriage cannot be ignored. Pocahontas' own agency, her intelligence, and her understanding of her role may have played a subtle part in ensuring that the legacy she carried was preserved. She was no passive participant. She may have knowingly navigated the complex web of alliances and rituals, acting as a guardian of knowledge while fulfilling the political expectations imposed upon her. Every action, every encounter in England, can be interpreted as a careful negotiation, a balancing act between survival, diplomacy, and the preservation of a forbidden legacy. Even after her untimely death, the reverberations of the marriage continued. Rolfe's descendants carried forward a lineage that may have preserved elements of this hidden heritage, intentionally or not, and the story of Pocahontas remained shrouded in both public fascination and historical ambiguity. The marriage, in essence, was a crossroads. It linked continents, bloodlines, and secrets, and its significance extends far beyond the charming tales taught in schools. It was a union that, if viewed through the lens of esoteric history, concealed a forbidden legacy, a carefully protected narrative that whispers across centuries, waiting to be pieced together by those who dare to look beyond the surface. The story of Pocahontas does not end with her death. In many ways, it only begins to unfold through the threads of her descendants. While mainstream history often frames her legacy in romantic or symbolic terms, a closer look at genealogy, historical whispers, and the persistence of hidden lineages reveals a far more compelling narrative. Her marriage to John Rolfe created a bloodline that carried forward both European connections and the sacred heritage of her indigenous ancestry, a union that, for some, may have been much more than a mere blending of families. It was a living continuation of the Grail bloodline, a subtle but enduring thread connecting the old world with the new, whispered about in secretive circles for centuries. Tracing the lineage of Pocahontas' descendants is a complex journey through centuries of marriages, migrations, and alliances. Records exist, but they are fragmented, scattered across parish registers, colonial documents, and private family archives. Within these fragments lie tantalizing hints of connections to influential families, some of whom held secret knowledge or were rumored to be protectors of sacred traditions. These descendants may have unknowingly carried within them not only the genetic legacy of Pocahontas, but also traces of cultural memory, esoteric knowledge, or symbols inherited from a lineage meant to guard secrets that few outside their circle could understand. Some genealogists and researchers have suggested that certain families in the United States, particularly in Virginia and the Chesapeake region, may be linked directly to her bloodline. These connections are often obscured by name changes, migration patterns, and the passage of time, yet subtle patterns emerge when one examines the historical records closely. Family crests, emblems, or repeated symbolic motifs can hint at a hidden awareness of ancestry. Occasionally, diaries, letters, or anecdotal recollections reveal an almost instinctual reverence for lineage and heritage, suggesting that even unrecorded knowledge may have been transmitted through generations in ways that defy formal documentation. Beyond the biological legacy, there's the question of influence and hidden guidance. Some theorists posit that descendants of Pocahontas may have played quiet, behind-the-scenes roles in shaping communities, maintaining traditions, or even safeguarding artifacts and knowledge linked to sacred bloodlines. These roles were not public or celebrated, but subtle acts. Marriages, land stewardship, or the careful preservation of documents that ensured the survival of a legacy that mainstream history tried to erase or ignore. In this way, the descendants become guardians, carrying forward a forbidden heritage that links Europe, indigenous America, and the mythic Grail bloodline into a continuum that stretches across centuries. The mystery deepens when examining potential symbolic markers in family histories, patterns of names, recurring motifs in private collections, and certain ceremonial observances that suggest a latent awareness of sacred heritage. Could it be that some traditions, long thought to be local customs or family eccentricities, were in fact echoes of a greater, hidden narrative? Perhaps the stories of bravery, spiritual guidance, or cultural preservation were ways for descendants to honor and maintain the essence of the legacy passed down by Pocahontas, even as the world around them remained oblivious to its significance. Ultimately, the legacy of Pocahontas and her descendants is a story of survival, not just of life, but of secret knowledge, of bloodlines intertwined with history, and of truths deliberately obscured yet quietly preserved. It challenges us to look beyond surface narratives and question the histories we accept as complete. The descendants are more than heirs. They are living links to a forbidden past, carriers of whispers that stretch back to sacred traditions and secret networks that sought to protect something far greater than themselves. In tracing their story, one begins to sense the depth and resilience of a legacy that refuses to vanish, a legacy that continues to whisper its secrets to those who are willing to listen. History is rarely a neutral record of events. It is a carefully curated story, shaped by those in power, written to emphasize certain narratives while erasing others. In the case of Pocahontas and her hidden legacy, the forces of suppression are unmistakable. From the earliest colonial documents to later retellings in textbooks and popular culture, there is a consistent pattern of omission, distortion, and simplification. The complex web of alliances, sacred bloodlines, and esoteric knowledge that may have surrounded her life has largely been obscured, leaving behind a sanitized version that fits comfortably into mainstream historical consciousness. Yet beneath this carefully constructed surface, evidence of suppression whispers to those who look closely enough. Consider the ways in which her story was retold. Colonial accounts, often written by English settlers with their own political agendas, downplayed her intelligence, agency, and influence, instead emphasizing exoticism and romance. The narrative of the Indian princess was designed to appeal to European sensibilities, masking the deeper significance of her role in both indigenous society and the hidden networks of European secret orders. In these retellings, the subtleties of bloodline, prophecy, and esoteric alliances are absent, deliberately omitted, or reframed as mere folklore. The true depth of her story, her position as a potential guardian of a forbidden legacy, is systematically erased. Suppression extends beyond the colonial period. As American history developed its own national narrative, Pocahontas' story was romanticized in literature, plays, and eventually films. Each iteration emphasized love, diplomacy, and cultural bridging, while eliminating or glossing over elements that might suggest sacred bloodlines, secret knowledge, or clandestine connections to European esoteric societies. Artifacts, letters, and documents that might have hinted at these truths were either ignored, misinterpreted, or placed in private collections, inaccessible to the public. In effect, history was rewritten to neutralize any potential challenge to the accepted story, ensuring that the larger implications of her life remained invisible. Even modern historians, constrained by available sources and academic frameworks, struggle to penetrate this veil. Many researchers who delve into colonial archives or genealogical records encounter obstacles: missing documents, ambiguous references, and the subtle biases embedded in primary sources. It is as if a silent hand has worked across centuries to obscure the connections between Pocahontas, her descendants, and the sacred or secret knowledge that may have accompanied them. These gaps in the historical record are not random. They suggest a deliberate erasure designed to protect the secrecy of a powerful legacy. Yet, paradoxically, suppression has a way of highlighting its own existence. The inconsistencies, contradictions, and mysteries in the historical record draw attention to what has been hidden. Letters that were carefully worded, portraits that emphasize certain details while omitting others, and repeated symbolic patterns all hint at an underlying truth. For those willing to read between the lines, the shadows of suppression are not empty. They are filled with clues, waiting to be deciphered. Every omission, every silenced detail, is a signpost pointing toward a story far more intricate and profound than mainstream history allows. The shadow of suppression is not merely about lost facts. It is about controlling perception. By shaping the narrative of Pocahontas' life, history itself became a tool to manage which truths could be acknowledged and which must remain hidden. Yet, the persistence of whispers, fragments, and hidden symbols across centuries suggests that the forbidden legacy endures. The shadow, though formidable, cannot entirely erase what was carefully guarded. It only challenges those who seek the truth to look closer, to question more deeply, and to recognize that the story of Pocahontas is as much about what has been hidden as what has been revealed. Even centuries after her death, the story of Pocahontas continues to ripple through history in ways both subtle and startling. Modern researchers, historians, and even amateur genealogists have uncovered fragments of evidence suggesting that her legacy, and the secrets she carried may not have vanished with the passage of time. Across dusty archives, family collections, and forgotten letters, hints of hidden knowledge emerge, teasing a connection to sacred bloodlines, esoteric wisdom, and the Grail myths whispered across Europe and the Americas. What was once carefully concealed now surfaces as tantalizing questions, waiting to be explored by those willing to follow the threads. In recent decades, scholars have begun to notice patterns in genealogical records, linking families descended from Pocahontas to unexpected regions, influential circles, and even secretive societies. These descendants, many unaware of the full extent of their heritage, sometimes hold traditions, artifacts, or symbolic practices that echo the stories of old. It is as if a hidden inheritance has been quietly transmitted through generations, surviving the disruptions of history, colonization, and cultural erasure. Whether it is a subtle emphasis in family records, an unusual naming convention, or the preservation of ritual knowledge, these traces hint at a network of wisdom that refuses to disappear. Beyond family histories, there are whispers of physical artifacts and relics connected to Pocahontas' lineage. Some claim that objects once thought mundane, such as jewelry, ceremonial items, or colonial documents, carry coded references to sacred bloodlines or Grail lore. Certain museums and private collections hold items whose provenance is uncertain, yet the symbols they bear align with esoteric traditions that stretch back centuries. These objects, often overlooked or misinterpreted, may be fragments of a larger puzzle, silently conveying truths that the mainstream historical narrative has ignored or suppressed. Modern scholarship has also explored the idea of hidden knowledge preserved through oral traditions. Indigenous communities have long maintained stories, songs, and ceremonies that carry encoded wisdom about their ancestors. While much of this knowledge has been marginalized or dismissed by Western historians, careful listening reveals a depth of insight that may intersect with European esoteric traditions. In this convergence, one can detect the faint outlines of a secret legacy, a bridge between worlds that Pocahontas herself may have embodied, linking indigenous prophecy with European mysticism in ways that remain largely invisible. Even contemporary researchers who do not subscribe to the idea of secret bloodlines acknowledge the peculiar coincidences that arise when tracing her descendants and historical connections. Unexplained patterns, repeated symbols, and mysterious alignments of events suggest a hidden hand shaping the narrative across centuries. These patterns provoke questions that challenge conventional history. Could a forbidden legacy truly survive the upheavals of time and colonial expansion? And if so, how much of it has remained deliberately hidden from public view? The allure of modern mysteries lies in their ambiguity. Unlike the more concrete historical accounts, these whispers leave space for speculation, investigation, and wonder. They encourage us to question what we know, to read between the lines, and to consider that even in the present day, the threads of a secret past continue to influence the world around us. The story of Pocahontas, far from being a closed chapter, stretches forward into the present, inviting discovery, contemplation, and perhaps even revelation for those who are willing to search beyond the surface. The persistence of these modern mysteries is a testament to the resilience of hidden knowledge. Despite centuries of suppression, erasure, and historical simplification, fragments of the forbidden legacy survive in whispers, artifacts, and lineage. They remind us that history is not merely what is written, but also what is concealed, encoded, and carried silently across generations. In pursuing these clues, we are drawn into a narrative that bridges the past and the present, revealing a hidden dimension of Pocahontas' story that continues to challenge, intrigue, and inspire. All the threads, hints, and whispers that have been building throughout this journey converge in a single, breathtaking revelation. The story of Pocahontas is not simply a tale of a native princess, a colonial marriage, or a fleeting moment in history. It is, at its core, a story of a forbidden legacy, one that intertwines sacred bloodlines, esoteric knowledge, and secret networks that span continents and centuries. The pieces of the puzzle, once hidden in plain sight, begin to align, revealing a pattern that suggests Pocahontas' life was part of a carefully orchestrated continuum designed to preserve something far greater than herself. The first piece of this revelation lies in her lineage. Pocahontas, as the daughter of Powhatan, was heir to a powerful indigenous heritage, a bloodline steeped in spiritual knowledge and cultural authority. When viewed through the lens of esoteric history, her family's position is no longer incidental. It becomes central to understanding the survival of sacred wisdom. Her marriage to John Rolfe, often portrayed as a pragmatic alliance, now emerges as a critical act in safeguarding this heritage. The union merged her ancestral line with European networks of influence, potentially connecting her to the elusive Grail bloodline, a hidden lineage that European secret societies had sought to preserve for generations. The second element of the legacy emerges in symbolism and secret communication. Every artifact, portrait, and document associated with her life, once dismissed as mundane, can be seen as a conduit for encoded knowledge. Portraits convey subtle gestures of power and lineage. Letters hide cryptic references, and ceremonial acts echo ancient rituals, forming a hidden language accessible only to those initiated into these secret networks. Through this lens, Pocahontas' presence in England, her baptism, and her reception at the royal court were not merely formalities. They were symbolic confirmations of her role as a guardian of a sacred inheritance. Thirdly, the hidden legacy persists in her descendants. Those who followed in her bloodline, consciously or unknowingly, carried the continuity of this forbidden knowledge. Whether through preserved traditions, subtle symbolic cues, or familial teachings, fragments of the Grail lineage survive the upheavals of colonization, war, and social change. Each descendant becomes a living vessel of this secret heritage, linking indigenous wisdom with European esoteric knowledge in a lineage that stretches across continents and generations. The hidden truth is that what was thought lost or suppressed is, in fact, alive, quietly enduring in the lives of those connected to her blood. Even modern mysteries point to the continued resonance of this legacy. Artifacts in private collections, genealogical curiosities, and whispered oral traditions all hint at the survival of sacred knowledge. These fragments, scattered across time and geography, are the remnants of a deliberate effort to protect something profound. Pocahontas, in this light, was not merely a historical figure. She was the keeper of a bridge between worlds, cultures, and traditions. The Grail bloodline she may have been connected to is less about legend and more about continuity. The careful preservation of wisdom and power across generations, veiled from the eyes of the many, but preserved by the vigilance of the few. The forbidden legacy, when fully appreciated, transforms our understanding of history. It reframes Pocahontas not as a passive participant in colonial history, but as a pivotal figure in a clandestine narrative that links the old world with the new, prophecy with practice, and sacred bloodlines with hidden knowledge. It suggests that beneath the familiar story of diplomacy and marriage lies a tapestry of secrecy, preservation, and power, woven by hands both seen and unseen. In the quiet moments between historical fact and whispered myth, the forbidden legacy calls out to those who listen carefully. It is a legacy of endurance, resilience, and hidden truth, an echo of a story too powerful to be entirely erased. And in realizing this, one begins to understand that Pocahontas' life, her choices, and her lineage are far more significant than history books have allowed. hinting at a truth that has waited centuries to be glimpsed, understood, and remembered. As the story of Pocahontas and her forbidden legacy reaches its conclusion, we are invited to step back and consider the profound implications of what has been revealed. The threads we have followed, her ancestry, her marriage, the hidden symbolism, the whispers of descendants, and the subtle traces preserved through centuries, all converge to create a narrative far more intricate than the conventional histories allow. What emerges is a reminder that history is never simply a linear record of events. It is a living tapestry, woven from both what is seen and what has been deliberately hidden, from truth and omission alike. In reflecting upon Pocahontas' life, we are compelled to reconsider our understanding of influence and legacy. She was a woman caught between worlds, navigating the collision of indigenous sovereignty and European colonization. Yet within that space, she may have held a secret power, an inheritance of knowledge and bloodline that transcended immediate politics and diplomacy. Her marriage, her journey to England, and even the silences surrounding her story take on new significance. These were not merely personal milestones, but acts that help preserve a sacred lineage and ensure the survival of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time and conquest. The broader reflection extends beyond Pocahontas herself to the nature of history and human memory. What we are taught in schools, what is preserved in mainstream accounts, is often a curated version of reality, designed to emphasize certain narratives while obscuring others. Yet the persistence of alternative traces, coded symbols, and genealogical curiosities suggests that even suppressed knowledge can endure. It survives in whispers, in subtle patterns, in artifacts that endure when their meaning is no longer understood. There is a quiet resilience in truth, a capacity to persist across generations, even under the shadow of deliberate erasure. Moreover, this resolution encourages a reconsideration of the present. The echoes of the forbidden legacy reach into contemporary times, prompting reflection on how we understand lineage, heritage, and the subtle interplay of power and knowledge. Descendants, knowingly or unknowingly, carry forward the imprint of this legacy, and the stories we tell, or fail to tell, about the past influence the ways in which history shapes identity, culture, and collective memory. There is a cautionary lesson here. What is hidden may still hold profound influence, and what is erased may continue to shape events and relationships in ways that are invisible until carefully examined. The cinematic arc of this story also reminds us of the human element at its center. Pocahontas was not a myth or a symbol. She was a living, breathing individual whose choices and agency intersected with forces far beyond her immediate comprehension. Her courage, intelligence, and adaptability enabled her to navigate treacherous waters, not only politically, but in terms of preserving a heritage that was larger than herself. The forbidden legacy she carried challenges us to consider how individuals can act as vessels for knowledge, bridging the visible and hidden worlds, and preserving secrets across generations. In the quiet conclusion of this narrative, we are left with a sense of awe, reflection, and lingering curiosity. The story of Pocahontas, far from being fully known, invites us to continue exploring, questioning, and listening for the whispers of the past. It is a story that resists finality, reminding us that the layers of history are complex, sometimes conspiratorial, and often astonishingly rich with hidden connections. The forbidden legacy, preserved through courage, secrecy, and subtle guidance, is not just a historical curiosity. It is a living testament to the endurance of knowledge, bloodlines, and the human desire to protect what is sacred. As we step away from the tale, there remains a quiet invitation to question, to investigate, and to remain vigilant for the truths hidden beneath the surface of history. In doing so, we honor the depth of the legacy, the resilience of those who preserved it, and the enduring mystery that continues to captivate and inspire centuries after the life of Pocahontas. Long before the arrival of English settlers, the Powhatan people carried a rich tapestry of stories, songs, and prophecies woven into the very fabric of their culture. These narratives were not merely entertainment or moral lessons. They were repositories of knowledge, memory, and guidance, passed down through generations to preserve wisdom about the world, the land, and the unseen forces that govern it. Among these stories were hints of sacred power, ancestral connections, and cosmic cycles that shaped both the individual and the community. When examined closely, certain myths reveal patterns and symbols that resonate with European Grail legends, suggesting a remarkable convergence of esoteric themes across continents. One of the most compelling aspects of Powhatan prophecy is its focus on lineage, continuity, and sacred responsibility. Leaders and warriors were often understood to carry the weight of ancestral knowledge, tasked with protecting and preserving it for future generations. These teachings were layered with metaphor and allegory, accessible only to those initiated into their deeper meanings. Pocahontas, as the daughter of Chief Powhatan, inherited not just political authority, but also spiritual responsibility. Her role was inextricably linked to prophecy, positioning her as a living bridge between her people and forces that extended beyond the visible world. Some scholars suggest that native prophecies contain subtle parallels to European Grail myths, particularly the emphasis on a chosen bloodline and the safeguarding of sacred knowledge. While the Grail is often imagined as a physical object, these prophecies and legends frame it as a living legacy, a continuity of wisdom preserved through select individuals and families. Pocahontas, in this interpretation, is more than a historical figure. She is a symbolic embodiment of this continuity, a guardian of secrets that her people understood to be vital, yet which colonial records largely overlooked or dismissed. Oral traditions provide additional layers of intrigue. Stories of celestial signs, mysterious travelers, and sacred rituals hint at encounters with forces beyond ordinary human comprehension. Certain songs and ceremonies, preserved through subtle shifts in language and rhythm, encode knowledge that may have once been shared with trusted outsiders or interpreted alongside esoteric symbols from distant lands. When these narratives are compared with European myths, a pattern emerges: recurring motifs of journeys, unions, and hidden treasures, both literal and spiritual, suggest a shared human fascination with guarding the sacred and transmitting it through generations. The convergence of native prophecy and European esoteric tradition raises profound questions. Could these seemingly separate streams of knowledge have intersected when English settlers arrived? Did figures like Pocahontas serve as intermediaries, consciously or unconsciously, between two worlds of hidden understanding? Evidence suggests that early contact was more than a mere meeting of cultures. It was a convergence of traditions, symbols, and wisdom, each influencing and reflecting the other in subtle yet enduring ways. Through this lens, the myths and prophecies of the Powhatan people become more than cultural artifacts. They are clues to a hidden architecture of knowledge, encoded in narrative, song, and ritual. Pocahontas' life, viewed through the prism of these prophecies, reveals her as both participant and guardian, a figure whose destiny was intertwined with forces both ancestral and universal. In exploring these connections, we begin to glimpse a broader, more mysterious story, one in which indigenous prophecy and European legend converge, creating a hidden legacy that transcends geography, culture, and time. Even today, echoes of these myths and prophecies linger in subtle ways, in songs, ceremonies, and family stories, hinting at truths that were never meant to be fully exposed, yet cannot be entirely hidden. They remind us that history is not merely the sum of written records, but also the enduring resonance of stories carried in memory, preserved in symbolism, and whispered across generations. Pocahontas, her bloodline, and her legacy stand at the intersection of these worlds, a living testament to the enduring power of prophecy, myth, and the sacred knowledge that survives in unexpected forms. As we draw the story of Pocahontas and her forbidden legacy to a close, the echoes of her life reverberate across centuries, bridging the past and the present in ways that are as subtle as they are profound. History, when stripped to its surface narrative, presents her as a historical figure shaped by circumstance. A princess caught between worlds, a wife, a mother, a symbol of early colonial diplomacy. But when we peer beyond the surface, through layers of prophecy, myth, secret networks, and esoteric traditions, a more intricate and compelling reality emerges. One of hidden knowledge, guarded bloodlines, and choices that shaped not only her destiny, but the trajectory of those connected to her lineage for generations to come. The forbidden legacy she carried is not merely an abstract concept. It is a living current, running quietly through descendants, artifacts, and cultural memory. Each generation that followed Pocahontas, whether aware of it or not, inherited fragments of her wisdom, her spiritual inheritance, and perhaps even her role as a guardian of sacred knowledge. This continuity challenges our understanding of history as linear and fixed, reminding us that some truths endure through subtle preservation, surviving suppression, erasure, and centuries of reinterpretation. In this way, the story of Pocahontas is less a closed chapter and more an ongoing narrative, quietly influencing those who are attuned to its whispers. Even today, the mystery persists. Scholars, genealogists, and curious minds continue to uncover hints of her enduring influence. In artifacts and family histories, in ceremonial echoes preserved by indigenous communities, and in symbolic motifs scattered across time and geography. Each discovery, no matter how small, reaffirms the possibility that knowledge deemed forbidden or lost is never truly gone. It merely waits, encoded in ways that can be read by those who know how to interpret the subtle signs, the patterns, and the enduring threads of lineage. In reflecting upon her life, one is reminded that history is a conversation between the visible and the hidden. The events recorded in documents, letters, and chronicles form only one layer of the story. Beneath them lies another, a network of meaning that encompasses prophecy, sacred inheritance, alliances, and guardianship of knowledge. Pocahontas' life sits precisely at this intersection, illuminating the ways in which individuals can act as bridges between worlds, both protecting and transmitting legacies that transcend the immediacy of their own time. The epilogue of her story is also a meditation on the power of observation and curiosity. What we choose to seek, question, and investigate shapes the histories we inherit and the truths we uncover. By exploring hidden networks, sacred bloodlines, and suppressed narratives, we honor the depth of human experience and the resilience of knowledge. Pocahontas' life is a testament to this enduring human capacity to carry wisdom across generations, to navigate the seen and unseen, and to ensure that even the most forbidden truths find a way to survive. As the centuries have passed, the story has taken on layers of myth, legend, and inspiration. Yet the essence of her legacy remains, a reminder that the world is always more intricate than it appears, that history is seldom neutral, and that knowledge, especially the knowledge deemed forbidden, has a remarkable way of enduring. The hidden networks she was part of, the alliances she helped forge, and the sacred inheritance she carried continue to resonate, inviting reflection, discovery, and reverence. In the quiet moments, one can almost feel the pulse of this legacy, the whispered continuity of bloodlines, the subtle preservation of knowledge, and the enduring symbolism that has survived despite the weight of centuries. Pocahontas is not simply a historical figure to be remembered. She is a living symbol of hidden truth, resilience, and the sacred responsibility that comes with guarding wisdom across generations. And so, as the story comes full circle, the question lingers: what other hidden legacies wait quietly in the shadows of history, unseen yet powerful, preserved by those who understood their significance? The tale of Pocahontas offers a glimpse into this world, a reminder that every life may carry secrets, and every narrative, no matter how familiar, may conceal deeper truths. In exploring these mysteries, we do more than uncover history. We engage with the living resonance of legacy itself, honoring those who have safeguarded knowledge across the centuries and opening our eyes to the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. The forbidden legacy is, in essence, an invitation to question, to investigate, to reflect, and to listen closely to the whispers of the past. It endures, silent yet profound, bridging worlds, weaving continents, and preserving truths that may forever lie beyond the reach of conventional history, yet always within the grasp of those willing to seek.